Hi class, in this presentation we're going to focus on the endocrine system. This is in chapter 17 of your Celadon textbook, and this system can be kind of beefy at times. Sometimes you can find an entire class dedicated to just the endocrine system. Endocrinology is a common 3-credit A&P related course. We're going to take that 3-credit class and try to condense it into an entire presentation or an entire chapter of this course. So, as we're looking at the endocrine system, I want to emphasize a couple things for us here. First, let me get our green color out here. We use the endocrine system for communication, particularly. There's some differences with compare and contrast the endocrine system and the nervous system because we both have communication as functions of both of those systems. The endocrine system is going to use hormones to communicate, whereas the nervous system is going to use neurotransmitters to communicate. So as we focus on the endocrine system, we're going to focus on a lot on what a hormone is, the basics regarding glands, some less details on hormone chemistry. We're going to spend a lot of time focusing on the endocrine system and some stress responses, paracrine secretions, and finally, what happens when we have some endocrine dysfunctions, with particular emphasis on diabetes. So as we look at how our body can communicate between cells. We have gap junctions. Cardiomyocytes, heart muscle cells are the classic example of that. A gap junction can be thought of as a pore or a hole in the cell membrane that allows a molecule or nutrient to go directly from one cell to the next cell. So kind of think of these as a way to exchange fluids directly from the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of the next cell. We could have neurotransmitters that are typically going to be released from neurons and travel across the synapse or the synaptic cleft, little gap in between cells, to initiate an action potential on the second cell. We get paracrine secretions. A paracrine secretion is going to be secreted into the extracellular fluid. And this is a key distinction here. It doesn't go into the bloodstream like hormones do. It goes into extracellular fluids and will affect the nearby cells. And then finally, we have those hormones, which are going to be chemical messengers, just like neurotransmitters and paracrines. The difference between hormones, paracrines, and neurotransmitters is that only hormones will enter into the bloodstream. And while those hormones are in the bloodstream, they'll travel to their other target tissues or organs. So as we look at our endocrine system, there's a whole bunch of structures associated with the endocrine system. Endo, in case you forgot, endo means in. So this is going to be a system that makes secretions into the bloodstream. We have various glands and tissues and cells all throughout the body. The study of the endocrine system is known as endocrinology. In particular, it's going to be a focus on treatment of endocrine disorders. As we look at endocrine glands, these are the organs that have been thought of as the traditional sources of hormones. And we say traditional sources of hormones because there's been increasing evidence that other tissue types, for example, adipose, secretes a variety of hormones in our bodies, just low-level hormones that are hard to isolate from a single chunk of adipose tissue cells or adipocytes. And if we look at those hormones, those chemical messengers, they are going to be able to trigger some kind of physiological response. When we think physiological, I want you to think chemical response that can change the chemical reactions in another cell. Oftentimes, these cells are a considerable distance away. When I say considerable distance, usually in a different part of the body is what I'm referring to. So here's an overview of the endocrine system and the principal organs. Within the brain, right there in the middle of the brain, we have our master gland, the pituitary gland. We have directly above it the hypothalamus, and then directly posterior to that we have the pineal gland. Within the within the neck, right around the larynx, we have the thyroids, and this is a posterior view. I need to emphasize that posterior view. And on the posterior of the thyroids, posterior medial margin of the two thyroids, we have the four paracrines. Within the abdominal pelvic cavity, we're going to have the adrenal glands directly superior to the kidneys, two adrenal glands for two kidneys, and then we have a big fat kind of hook-shaped or comma-shaped pancreas. Males are going to have a testicle. Females will have an ovary. So as we're looking at these glands, exocrine glands are also in our bodies. And when we talk about exocrine glands, exo means out. And they're going to carry ducts that secrete or have ducts that go to the surface of the body. Now, when we say surface of the body, this could mean the exterior surface, the interior surface. The interior surface is known as the digestive tract. These secretions of the digestive tract will eventually exit the body. And these exocrine glands are typically going to have extracellular effects. Sweat can cool us off. Digestive enzymes, well, can digest food. Mucus in our lungs can trap pollen and dust, and then we can cough it up. As we look at endocrine glands, note that there are no ducts. No ducts associated with an endocrine gland, whereas exocrine glands do have the ducts. Instead, endocrine glands are going to have a lot of capillaries. And those capillaries are going to absorb or uptake the hormones that are secreted by the endocrine glands. So when we think of endocrine glands, I want you to think of internal secretions into the bloodstream. The primary goal of the endocrine glands is to have intracellular effects. So instead of affecting the outside of the cells of our body, we want to affect the metabolism, the chemistry on the inside of the cells of our body. Now, as we look at our liver is tough. It's an in-betweeny weenie. It just is really hard to classify because our liver does so many different things. It releases hormones, it makes biles, it creates blood proteins, it does lots of different things. So it's worth mentioning here because yes, there are some hormones created by the liver. So a discussion on the endocrine system does merit mentioning of the liver, but the liver is also part of the digestive system. It's also part of the circulatory system. It's that jack of all trades organ. As we're looking at nervous versus endocrine systems, let's talk about time of response and persistence of response. So when we look at the nervous system, I want you to think of fast response. Milliseconds is the kind of time scale we're looking at here. When we think of the endocrine system, I want you to think of a slow response, seconds or days, in terms of how long that response lasts. As we think about adaptation to stimulus, response is going to decline rapidly. So in other words, when you put on your earrings, you can feel yourself putting on your earrings the moment you put your earrings on. Very quickly, you'll start to ignore your earrings. Or same thing about when you put on a t-shirt. You can probably feel your t-shirt the moment you put it on, but then you start to ignore it pretty quickly. On the other hand, when we think of hormones, our body is going to have a very slow time adapting to hormones. When you have some stress hormones in your body, it takes you days, weeks to respond to those stress hormones. And in terms of the area of effect with the nervous system, it's kind of like a smart missile. It's going to zoom in really fast and target a specific organ or tissue, very, very precise targeting. And then when we think of our endocrine system, I want you to think of it as kind of a weapon of mass destruction in our body. It's going to release these chemicals into our bloodstream, and it's going to target absolutely everything in the body. Well, maybe not absolutely everything. There's the blood-brain barrier that helps prevent the spread of the hormones. Generally speaking, if there's a bloodstream associated with that tissue, there's going to be the hormone being delivered to that tissue in our bodies. So as we look at our endocrine system and our neurotransmitters, there's some double dippers here. We can have some chemicals that act as both a neurotransmitter and a hormone. For example, we have norepinephrine, dopamine, and antidiuretic hormone. These are double dippers. We also are going to find that the same organ system, or these different organ systems, the endocrine versus the nervous system, can have a similar effect on target cells. They can do the same kind of thing to the same kind of tissue. For example, norepinephrine and glucagon, one's a neurotransmitter, one's a hormone. They can both cause glucagon hydrolysis in the liver. As we're looking at these two systems, they interact with each other. They regulate each other. There's a tug of war with these two different systems. Neurotransmitters affect the endocrine system and the hormones released by the endocrine system. And then the hormones released by the endocrine system are going to affect the neurons and the neurotransmitters released by the neurons. So there's some, as there's this dynamic equilibrium between the two, there's a lot of homeostasis at play. And as we look at neuroendocrine cells, these are going to be neurons that secrete endocrine chemicals, or neurons that secrete hormones. These neuron-like cells can secrete oxytocin directly into the bloodstream and be electrically active. So, just to help further reiterate some of the differences between the nervous system and the endocrine systems, as we're looking at the target cells or the target organs within the nervous system, we're going to have a neuron have its axon go directly to the target cells. So it can be very precise, very targeted. When we think of the endocrine system, we're going to have those endocrine cells release hormones into the bloodstream. Those hormones travel through the bloodstream to another capillary bed and then diffuse out of the capillary bed to the target tissue type, the target cells. So that's all we have for this recording. This was an introduction recording to the endocrine system. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them to the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.